Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I am a banana slug at heart, so I just wanted to make sure that you saw that. All right, here I am with a beautiful backdrop that some of you will recognize and our guest will tell us about later. So this is the second of in a series of the presidential leadership conversations, and our goal is to give our community members throughout UC an opportunity to hear from our leadership and also from others about their professional journeys and their unique campuses and topics that are most pressing for them today. And particularly for the staff at the Office of the President, I think it's a great way for you to get a sense firsthand from the leadership of our campuses, because all of you come to work every day and do things that support these wonderful 10 campuses, but may not get an opportunity to be there very often and to see the results of the work that you do. So that's really one of the main reasons I wanted to do this. We have a great treat today to hear from Chancellor Cindy Larive. And so welcome, Chancellor. Great to have you with us. Chancellor Larive is the 11th Chancellor of the University of California at Santa Cruz. She leads an institution known around the world for its high impact research, for interdisciplinary work on the world's greatest challenges, for its commitment to social and environmental justice, and of course, its mascot, the banana slug, which we'll get to in more detail later. Under Chancellor Larive's leadership, UC Santa Cruz has cemented its place as a preeminent research university with research expenditures over 200 million a year. She is an accomplished bioanalytical chemist and came to UC Santa Cruz from UC Riverside, where she was provost and executive vice chancellor. And like many UC chancellors, her journey is unmistakably UC. She's a first generation college graduate, earning a bachelor's degree from South Dakota State University and a master's from Purdue, both in chemistry, and a PhD in analytical chemistry from UC Riverside. So those are the highlights from her career, but now we're going to learn a little bit more about her in her own words. But to start on the right level of seriousness, I understand that Chancellor Larive is a dedicated Colbert watcher. And so we're going to start off with a few questions from the famous Colbert questionnaire. You ready?
I'm ready.
What's the best sandwich?
Peanut butter and jelly on wheat toast.
What's the one thing that you should really throw out?
I have a shirt from about 1990 that I can no longer wear, but it has these beautiful flowers on it. And when our girls were little, we were watching a hummingbird, and it came and tried to poke into one of my flowers, and so I'm attached to it.
Well, then you shouldn't throw it out.
No, I haven't.
Have you ever asked anyone for their autograph?
Yes, once. When I was at the University of Kansas, a famous chemist, Nobel laureate, Rudy Marcus, came to visit us. And so I was there with my oldest daughter, who was in the third grade at the time, and we went up after the talk and got Rudy's autograph, and I think she still has it.
Favorite smell?
Lilacs in the spring.
Most used app on your phone?
Email.
If you could listen to one song for the rest of your life, what is it?
The Big Rock Candy Mountain.
Your favorite land-dwelling mollusk?
Gotta be the state mollusk of California, the banana slug.
Well, that transitions us into the most important question of the day, and that is why the banana slug, and what's the story around that as the mascot?
Yeah, it's a particularly UC Santa Cruz story. So in the mid 1980s, Chancellor Shinsheimer, who was a great chancellor for our campus, he brought Division III athletics to UC Santa Cruz, and he had chosen the mascot, which would be the sea lion, something he thought was more dignified than the alternative. The students had completely other ideas, and they launched a campaign to have the banana slug, our local mollusk, and a really unique feature of the redwood forest be our mascot. And in the end, their sort of creativity and humor and protests and overwhelming public support landed us the banana slug. And so uh, I love it because it's got the best athletic tagline of any mascot. No known predators, which is true because they're neurotoxic, and so nothing eats them. The other thing
Uh,
I'd add is if you saw Pulp Fiction, there's a banana slug UC Santa Cruz T-shirt
John
is
Travolta is wearing it.
John Travolta wears, so that
Right.
contributed to the lore.
Well, I have a friend with me who's very happy that you were able to talk about his rise to prominence.
Yeah.
Not everybody has been to UC Santa Cruz. And so you have an opportunity to tell people what it is that you want them to know about it.
Well, first of all, everybody should come because UC Santa Cruz is a beautiful place and a great destination, Santa Cruz. But if you haven't been here, you should know that ours is by far the most beautiful campus in the country. It's nestled in the redwood forests and overlooks the Monterey Bay. And it's built in a way that's it's not like a normal campus in your mind. So if you thought about what's the Hollywood version of a college campus, is not UC Santa Cruz. We don't have a quad. We have buildings. There are about 20,000 students and 7,000 staff. We're nestled here in the forest. Like if you thought I want to build a university in a national park, that would be UC Santa Cruz. And the bridge that you see behind President Milliken, that's one of our many bridges that go through the forest across gorges, give us shortcuts. That one is goes from the library, the McHenry Library.
It's stunning. So my memory is from the Gold and the Blue,
Mhm.
Clark Kerr's memoir about his primarily about his time at UC. That UC Santa Cruz was sort of his his dream, his favorite, his gem. Tell us a little bit about that. Why is that?
Yeah, so we were an experiment, and as a scientist, I love experiments. And so the experiment at UC Santa Cruz was to do something that would be really focused on the undergraduate experience. So in the first days of UC Santa Cruz, we didn't have graduate students, and he modeled UC Santa Cruz on the kind of Oxford residential college model, and that serves us very well. Even today, we now have 10 residential colleges. It's a way of having students come into a big research university and find a smaller community based on a particular theme. And each of the colleges has their own theme. Rachel Carson's college's theme is about environmental sustainability, but the Cowell College theme is my favorite. Cowell was our first college, and their theme is pursuit of truth in the company of friends. And I like that as a motto. And so as we grew, the campus evolved, and we now have PhD students and master's students and do high level research. But that experiment, I think, um, really helped to shape our campus culture.
So you and I are both natives of the beginning of the West, in
Yes.
South Dakota in your case, and Nebraska in mine.
Mm.
Um, what was it like? I mean, you grew up in what has become, if you watch television, a well-known town, Deadwood, South Dakota. Uh,
Mhm.
you must cringe when people talk about getting rid of the Deadwood, but in any event, you came from Deadwood. which is not a metropolis, and
No.
went to South Dakota State before you were a banana slug, you were a jackrabbit. Um, so tell us a little bit about what that was like growing up in Deadwood and being a first generation college student in South Dakota.
Yeah. So we actually lived on a small subsistence farm outside of Deadwood. So I was a suburbanite, I guess. But Deadwood at that time was about 2,000 people, and the Deadwood and the neighboring town, Lead, South Dakota, were really dominated by the gold mine that was at the in Lead. My dad worked there as a laborer, and it was the Homestake gold mine. And so that was a defining sort of organizing function for all of us in Lead and Deadwood. Most everybody's dad worked at the mine. And I remember when I was at the library, I hung out a lot at the library. Those of us who are a little bit nerdy sometimes find solace in places like the public library. And there was Deadwood's a town where everybody knows everybody, right? So there was a stranger in the library and was there almost every day. So I asked the head librarian, Mrs. Pontiac, who is that man? And she said, he's from Los Angeles and he's come to read the newspapers. So this was David Milch, who was conceiving of the HBO series on Deadwood. And the first 2 years are really pulled from the Deadwood Pioneer Times, which was a real paper and it started in 1876 when the gold rush began. And so then it deviated and got less interesting. But if you've watched that series, the language in there is pretty colorful. And I would say I grew up learning similar language, and although I don't practice it today. But my folks, they were hardworking, honest people, and I admire them greatly. And my mother finished high school. My dad had a tough time growing up in the Depression and left school at the third grade and didn't know how to read, but they wanted something better for me. And so, I really appreciate all the support they gave me.
So I haven't, I'm not proud of this, but I don't see a lot of television. I'm not
Okay.
bragging about it, but is Deadwood worth seeing?
I think it's a pretty good series. It's old now. It was on HBO a long time ago. You can probably get it on Netflix, I would suppose. I think it's colorful. It's interesting. And I wouldn't watch it all, but have a few episodes. We
Uh,
watch the Colbert Report as you mentioned, but we tape it and then watch it the next day because I don't want to stay up that late. And then we just fast forward through the interesting parts. You could do that with Deadwood too.
so you grew up hanging out at was it a Carnegie Library in Deadwood?
Yeah, it was a Carnegie Library.
Oh, cool. I wonder if it's still a library today. A lot of them have been repurposed,
I don't
but
remember.
they were great town centers. We had one in
Yeah.
my town in Nebraska too. Um, so you grew up in Deadwood, pursued your education in Deadwood public schools plus the
Mhm.
library, and then went to South Dakota State. So, and you were a first generation, obviously, as we just learned.
Mhm.
Um, was that an easy thing to do?
Um, it was sometimes easy. It was sometimes challenging. I went to South Dakota State University because I got a scholarship to go there. And I know all of the folks watching understand how important financial aid and scholarships are for students like me, low income first gen students. And so the person who gave my scholarship was Stephen F. Briggs, who was the co-inventor of the Briggs and Stratton engine. And he gave 5 scholarships a year to students who wanted to pursue science and 5 to students who wanted to pursue engineering. And we got invited to go interview for this scholarship. And I had not a very fancy upbringing, and we had to go the night before the interview and to this big dinner, and we sat down. I sat down next to this nice man who was the dean of pharmacy. I had to say, well, what does a dean do? I had no idea how universities work. And there was way too much silverware on this table. I just didn't even know where to begin. And he was very kind and said, explain to me the silverware to use. And then luckily I was awarded this scholarship. And that made such a difference because it paid for all my tuition and fees and books. And then I worked in order to make my living expenses. So, I managed to get through it okay. But I was always at the beginning very insecure about being there. It seemed like everybody was smarter than me, and the kids who had gone to bigger town schools had calculus, at more advanced classes, and I just thought, yeah, I'm not sure I belong here. And then one day in our first semester chemistry course, the instructor asked me to come up after class. I was just ready to be sick because I thought, okay, they found me out, you know, I'm the imposter. Now it's coming. But he said, you're one of the two chemistry majors in this whole big group of students, and I want you to come do research with me. And I said, okay, I didn't know what it meant, but I came and he mentored me and I got involved in undergraduate research as a freshman. And that was really a life-changing experience for me. And I see that repeated here at UC Santa Cruz over and over and over again. Students being mentored and helped by our faculty engaging in research and field work and all kinds of things that helps them not just have a powerful educational experience, but be welcomed into the university in a very personal way.
Did you know when you went to college on day one that you were going to be a chemistry major, or did this come about in part
Oh,
because
no. I knew I was going to be a chemistry major. When I was 9, my parents gave me a chemistry set for my birthday. And in those days, you could do something with a chemistry set. I wouldn't buy one now because you could better things in your kitchen than you can buy in a chemistry set. But I did experiments and I had an alcohol burner and I could do flame tests. I did all kinds of things on my bed. And then one day I tipped the alcohol burner over and caught my bedspread on fire. And fires are not very hot, so I patted it out. And then, oh my gosh, I had to tell my mother. Imagine. And I wouldn't have been as good a mother as my mother was because she said to me, if you're going to be a scientist, you have to be more careful. And she took away my bedspread and said, you don't need a bedspread, but I don't want you to do your experiments on your bed any longer. You know, Other mothers would take away your chemistry set, right? Because it's too dangerous. But she didn't do that.
yeah, I don't think chemistry sets today would have some of the same
For
characteristics.
sure. For
Yeah.
sure. But
Uh,
then another thing that happened to me, which was really transformational, is I was working in the summer at the gold mine leading surface tours. So if your dad worked for the homestake, you could go and work there in the summer, and my male colleagues got to work in the machine shops or the sawmill or places where they made pretty good money. Got minimum wage to be a tour guide and lead people around the surface workings of the mine. It was good experience talking to people. But then they wanted us tour guides to know what it was like to be in the mine. So we went down inside the homestake. At that point, it was the largest gold mine in the Western Hemisphere. And there were two surface shafts that would go down to the 4850 level, 4,850 feet below the surface. We're walking down this drift. Think of me. I've got my hard hat on with a little light on it. And we turn a corner, and there was this whole drift, a whole tunnel full of computers. Now think about it. In 1976, computers are bigger than your refrigerator. And they had tape decks and flashing lights. We go past all these computers, and there's a man there in a white coat from the University of Pennsylvania. They were doing a neutrino catching experiment. And so neutrinos are particles that come from the sun and they pass through the earth. And they were trying to determine the flux of neutrinos, and putting it underground in the mine allowed them to screen out all the other particles and gamma rays and things. And so I stayed and I talked to this man for a long time. And he said, what is it you want to do? You're obviously interested in science. And I said, well, I'm going to be a high school chemistry teacher because I knew what that was. And he said, well, that's good. We need chemistry teachers. We also need scientists. You could be a scientist. And that was the first time I knew really that being a scientist was a career. So it changed my whole trajectory. So I went to the South Dakota State University to be a chemist, to be a scientist.
This is when I talk to student groups about careers and leadership and life. Uh, One of the things I always say is that one of the greatest determinants is going to be happenstance or serendipity
Mhm.
in your life.
Yeah.
And you think about this sort of serendipitous experience that you work in the mine as a tour guide, you meet a faculty member from Pennsylvania, you
Mhm.
learn what it is to be a scientist for the first time. I mean, if that hadn't happened, your life might be different.
Probably, I'd probably be a high school chemistry teacher in South Dakota somewhere.
You'd be a good one. That would be
I
good.
think so too.
So, one of the challenges in California and really across the country, but we certainly see it acutely in California, is that making sure that we have a healthy population, that we have a way to deliver appropriate health care across the entire state.
Mm.
UC Santa Cruz has recently increased its capacity, so I say congratulations on the Prime Central Coast partnership that you have with UC Davis. I'd like to
Mhm.
hear a little bit more of the thinking behind that, and then if you would, kind of what's next.
Yeah, thank you. So this really built from a program that was created by our faculty in the social sciences and the sciences, who came together to create, before I arrived, a global and community health program. So it's really unique in my mind in that it has two pathways, a BA in social science and a BS in science. And that's kind of a traditional pre-med pathway. But the students come together their first year and they're a cohort and they're all together. They do courses in global and community health, get prepared for their career, learn about social inequities with respect to healthcare and health. And then they kind of separate and go on their pathways, and then they come back together as seniors as a whole group and do community-based projects. And I think it's really a remarkable program. It's in its fourth year, and it has over 500 majors. And that program then became a launching point for the next step, which was to create a post-baccalaureate pre-med program. So here on the Central Coast, we do not have enough doctors. We're in a healthcare desert, and we're trying to do what we can to help ameliorate that problem. And so Grant Hartzog, one of our biology faculty, created a post-baccalaureate program. It's in its second year now, and it helps students who already have a bachelor's degree and want to either have a gap year and prepare to apply to medical school, or maybe people are career changers. And we have about 60 students in that program now. We teach it at our campus in Marina, which is near Salinas and Monterey, and in the Silicon Valley. And so then, as we were doing this, we thought about, we have such amazing faculty in areas like genomics and RNA biology and in the social sciences. We could at some point have a medical school. So we started thinking about that. I mean, it's a huge endeavor to just start a medical school. So we had some conversations with UC San Francisco and UC Davis, and the Davis program in rural health is a good fit for our region. And they were such great collaborators in helping us think about a pathway program where students would come from the Central Coast to UC Davis, do their first 2 years at UC Davis, and then come back here to the Central Coast to do their clinical coursework and hopefully also their residency. And so that's this Prime Central Coast program that we're launching. Students are able to apply now for that program, and they would start at UC Davis in July 2027. And we're going to start with 6 students, and then we're going to be able to grow that to 16 over time. And we hope to become a branch campus of UC Davis. And I think eventually UC Santa Cruz should have its own medical school here on the Central Coast. But that's a really long time away.
So thank you for that. Let's shift to a different subject. I want to talk about the role of universities, in particular Santa Cruz, in regional economic development. And you've established something called the Innovation and Business Engagement Hub to connect with industry, and you have a lot of tremendous industry in your area. So tell us a little bit about that and how that advances regional economic activity, but also the impact it has on your students.
Yeah, thank you. We have some industry here. What's most common is that great companies sprout up in Santa Cruz and then move to Silicon Valley or elsewhere in the Bay Area. We'd like to keep them here on the Central Coast. There's some good examples of it. Netflix is one, but the university was struggling, I think, a little bit to really kickstart innovation and entrepreneurship on our campus. And so we created this Innovation and Business Engagement Hub, and it's now 5 years old. And so its goal was to create an innovation and entrepreneurship model, sort of distinctly UC Santa Cruz. And so that means to us that it's interdisciplinary, impactful, really grounded in our public mission and student-centered. And so that investment in creating the hub has gained real momentum. It's the front door and welcome mat for companies who are interested in collaborating with our faculty or licensing our technologies. We have, over the past 4 years, had over 200 invention disclosures, about 150 patents, if I remember right. And we've had 8 startup companies that have licensed our intellectual property. Several more are in the works. And so we're excited about those kinds of impacts. We also participate in something called the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership. This is a group that serves Santa Cruz County, Monterey County, and San Benito County. Santa Cruz Works is our local accelerator. And so we're trying to build a regional ecosystem that's focused on economic development and sustainable methods of helping companies to be here on the Central Coast. But students are really important, and we have a Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurial Development that was founded by a former faculty member, Napinder Kapani. Napinder was really the person who figured out fiber optics. Pretty amazing guy. And the center, we call it SEED, supports innovation and entrepreneurial development in undergraduate students. And we have a set of courses that they now can take and get a certificate. And so we hope to see a lot of our students starting companies in the future.
That's great. So let's shift to an industry that you have some early experience with, agriculture.
Yeah.
And we don't always think about Santa Cruz in the way we think about Davis and others with their agriculture experiment stations. But you do work in agroecology and organic farming and areas that may be particularly meaningful at Santa Cruz. So tell us about that.
Yeah, we have a really proud history in that area. The campus was founded in 1965, and in 1967, Alan Chadwick came to UC Santa Cruz and started an organic garden on 2 acres. We still have it today, the Chadwick Garden. And through that, we gradually established a farm on campus. It's about 30 acres. And we've been doing sustainable organic farming sort of since the start. But more important than that, we've been able to train people from across the country and around the world through our apprenticeship program how to do sustainable organic farming. So we've had a huge impact in this area. We have now an agroecology undergraduate major that's very popular. But in addition to that, so many students on our campus do internships, paid internships on our farm, growing produce. And about half of that produce is used on campus and our student pantries. It's used in our Cal coffee shop, which is run by students for students, where you can go in and get a hot meal and not pay anything. It's a great thing. But what really was transformational for us is a few years ago, the UC system gave us the Agricultural Experiment Station designation, AES. That puts us on par with Davis and Berkeley and Riverside. And so us and Merced were given this designation. The first campuses to get that in 50 years, I would add. And so that's made a big difference in our ability to have specialists who help to translate the research that happens on our campus into the ag community on the Central Coast and even all around. And so we now have specialists in areas like organic agriculture, ag economics for smaller organic farms, and we're getting a new position in food safety, which is really important for our region. In Salinas, which is the lettuce bowl of the country, a lot of there are sometimes problems with contamination, and that can be really devastating for people who are impacted, but also for the companies who are doing it. So the idea is if you can help to use sensors or drones, be able to detect like contamination from, maybe from birds or from wild hogs in the field, you never get that into the supply chain. And so we're really excited about that. It'll be a partnership with the shippers and growers in Salinas and also with UCA&R.
Terrific. So one of the things that I am most focused on right now, and that you can't pick up a newspaper or other people watch screens. I actually look at newspapers, but the stories on artificial intelligence and how it is going to change everything in the world. So I'm interested in your thoughts and how you are thinking about how UC Santa Cruz positions itself in a world that's evolving very quickly in AI.
Yeah, it's changing so fast. It's really hard. It's really hard to stay on it. We're doing this in a variety of ways. Uh, Things are popping up around campus. We have a AI center that's in computer science and engineering that's thinking about, you know, um, uh, these kind of chat GPT kind of models. We've got a group of faculty who in genomics and particle physics and astronomy and whole other areas who are really using machine learning and those kind of tools to study the cosmos and health things that we can get from the human genome and trying to think about fusion energy, all kinds of important things. We're trying to think about how we can use AI to streamline processes in the university, make things more efficient. But where it impacts teaching and the student experience, that's really an interesting area. And I don't think we yet have all the answers. We just have a lot of questions and some interesting ideas. So one of our alumni is Daniela Amadei. She's the co-founder of Anthropic. And so she's a pretty amazing woman and was a humanities major at UC Santa Cruz. And she recently wrote an article that was picked up in the Wall Street Journal and some other places about how humanities is really the majors people should be thinking about for a future in AI. That sort of resonates with me because, I think that AI is an interesting tool. And how are we going to use the tool? And in what ways can we use it for good, for benefit? One of the things I admire about Daniela is that she is got a good conscience and is thinking about Anthropic and how they employ AI. But so I think about our students, and I know students are using AI, as many, probably everybody on the call is using AI in some way or another. But what do I want students to know, and how do I want them to be prepared for this future that's so rapidly changing? And I think about, what we can give to students at UC Santa Cruz. One of those is experiences, like the research experience I talked about earlier, but it's the kind of traditional educational liberal arts ideas of critical thinking, being able to read deeply, analyze data, communicate well with other people, one-on-one or in groups, be work as part of a team, and being able to use your judgment and to be able to use your judgment in ways that have some ethical basis. And so those kinds of skills are what I think a university education in this age of AI has to give to our students. And so you probably have to have some skills with using AI to do most any job. But to be able to really bring value added, I think you need those other skills as well. And I think you can get that in humanities. I think you can get it in a lot of different ways. Now, I'll give you a concrete example. We have a faculty member in the humanities. His name's Benjamin Breen, and I'm a big fan of his. And he develops these AI generated virtual reality situations where you can put on those goggles. I don't like them. They make me kind of dizzy, but I think the kids can use them. And you might be having a conversation, President Milliken, with Che Guevara in Cuba at the time of the revolution, or with Plato. And then after the experience, the questions that you're asked to answer is, what did AI get right? What did it get wrong? And then how to evaluate, the experience and what it meant to be in that time can teleport you in a way. There are really amazing things I think we can use with AI in our educational systems. But we also have to be cognizant of the fact that um, it's changing the way everything happens, right? It's changing jobs. I hear that some companies now have an AI detector. So when you write your cover letter and your resume, if it looks like AI made it, then they detect that. I I don't know, how do our students sell themselves? It's going to be internships you have, experiences, and probably you need a portfolio like an artist has. So our global and community health major I talked about before, they have each student create a portfolio and a Google site that can really showcase what they've done and what they know in a way that you can't get from a cover letter and a resume.
I have, well, first of all, let me say, Daniela, I have a soft spot in my heart for her and for the piece that she just did. She was an English major, as I was, and I am
Mhm.
absolutely convinced that this is a tremendous opportunity for humanities disciplines that have been declining in
Mhm.
popularity over the years.
Mhm.
But I do agree that this is an area now where there will be life beyond AI for
Mhm.
people who understand more about how humans interact and what's important. Um, I can't help but notice that almost every response that you have given about any area that I've asked about has not been about what you've done or what your administrative team has done. It's almost in every case you refer to a faculty member who did X, Y, and Z, and that led to this. So it's clearly something that you recognize. And so I have a couple of questions on this general topic. And the first one is, in a time of constrained budgets, in a time of fiscal
Mhm.
pressure at the state, cutbacks from Washington, how do you see our role in continuing to attract the the best possible faculty and to nurture them and support them in their work.
Yeah, that's a great question. I also would add, I worry about retaining them. And, but so far we've had pretty good luck in that way. I mean, one of the things that's unique about UC Santa Cruz is this interdisciplinary nature we have among our research and our faculty. We tend to attract people who like our student body, who like our values of trying to provide access to an excellent education to first generation low income students. And many of our faculty come from similar backgrounds, and I think that helps us. We also somehow seem to attract people that have a larger proportionality of being nice, I think, than many other places. They're, it's a low key place. People in Hawaiian shirts and sandals a lot. And I think that kind of helps. But, we're going to have to compete at a pretty high scale. And so far, we've managed to do that with our science and engineering and social science and humanities and arts, our five academic divisions. But the technological race in compute kind of worries me, right? Because we've got to try and find a way to be able to have the higher level computers that will allow our scientists to be able to do the experiments that they need to be able to do in computing, and our engineers also to be able to do digital twin kinds of creations and understand things. I worry about that a little bit. I think that another thing that worries me is the instability of the investment of the federal government. I'm really grateful that the Congress passed a budget that's more like what we had last year and not didn't include the big cuts that I worried about from the president's initial budget suggestions. But I'm worried about how that's going to play out over time and how the university will be able to sustain research and address the really opportunity that we have to be able to contribute to health and wellness and environmental stability and coastal climate resilience and all the many things that we have the potential to do. We'll need smart people in our faculty and students and researchers, and we'll need the technology that's going to be the driver for that.
Want to mention that we're about 2/3 of the way through this, and we've got about 430 people on. And we've had several questions, but if anybody wants to ask a question, I'm not sure I'll get to all of them because I do have a number that were submitted ahead of time, but I am going to go to one of them now that was submitted during the call, and it follows on this theme about faculty and what I mentioned before about your reference to the leadership of the faculty in many areas. So this question says your approach to shared governance, and in particular working with the academic senate and other campus constituencies. Say a little about that.
Yeah, I think that's a place that's really important in the UC system. And I'll be honest, I think it's a place we haven't done so good recently. We've had a couple of missteps, and I have a really great relationship with our academic senate chair. And we recently got from them a document that says, here's how we think we can do better. And so we're partnering on that. I think that the academic senate is the kind of the administrative counterpart of the faculty. So we get a lot of good input and insight from consulting with them. But I also hear a lot from faculty just sort of writ large, and I think that's important too.
Um, you have done at UC Santa Cruz a better job than many places in terms of the housing for students and provide a greater share of that than any of our other campuses. So I know this is something we all think about all the time. is there anything you want to say about what the future looks like, or the commitment of the campus to that?
Yeah, I'm really glad to talk about housing. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, and it's something we actually have done administratively. So we can have that counterpoint. But when I arrived here in 2019, it was clear to me Santa Cruz was in a housing crisis. This was true in the city. It was certainly true on our campus, and in the city it was true because Santa Cruz hadn't really built much housing for 30 years. And one of the things that changed that was the legislature's requirement that cities build housing according to certain numbers. They're called RENA numbers. And so now we have apartments springing up all around Santa Cruz. For the campus, I realized that our problem came because between 2008 and 2019, when I arrived, the campus grew enrollment by about 2,800 students, but they were only able to build housing for about 380 students. And so even though we house more than half of our undergraduates on campus, we're not in a urban area where the housing is just like you can commute. There's just a lot of beautiful open land around us. And so the campus has a responsibility, I think, to house our students. So we started in with a 10-year housing plan, and we're working our way through that. Right now, Kresge College's phase two housing will come online, about half of it this year, half of it next year. That's 600 additional beds. So Kresge College will now hold almost 1,000 students, where before they had 365. We've built new family student housing and a new child care center. We have a MOU with a developer to build this beautiful housing that's going up on Santa Cruz's west side. That we'll have the ribbon cutting for that May 21st. I'm excited. So this is apartments for upper division undergraduates, and 400 of them, and 62 apartments for our employees. And 19 of the units for employees are going to be for lower income employees. And then we have other housing projects we're getting ready to start, and a whole plan that will lead us to building 40% more student housing within the decade. So that's important for us. It's important to provide healthy, sustainable, affordable housing. It's also important because we know students who can live on campus typically have, as a group, better performance than students who might live off campus.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so one of the things that has troubled me for the last couple of years, and I'm certain you've thought about this too, is the polling data that we see about lack of confidence in higher education, and maybe even more startling and with more potential impact is the idea that college isn't worth it, and people don't need to get a college degree. What do you think about on both of those topics?
Yeah, I think a lot about this. And uh, I think about it too as a public institution. If the public doesn't believe in the power of higher education, it's going to be difficult for us to sustain what we're trying to do. And there is a new poll. I don't know if you've seen it, President Milliken from Gallup, about polling undergraduates and recent alumni about their views. And their views are actually much more positive than the polls I've seen for the general public. I think there are plenty of pathways that you can be successful without going to college. It's true. I mean, if you wanted to be an electrician, you can be an apprentice. You might start at a community college, but in 5 years, you could be licensed as an electrician. That's a great pathway. But for students who want to have the experience of going to the university, I think it is a valuable thing, and I think it provides value in a whole number of ways. Some of them are harder to quantify, but it helps students have an opportunity for self-discovery. I think many of us who went to college had that experience, but it also prepares you with those skills I talked about earlier. communication, critical thinking, that are going to help you for the jobs of the future, jobs that have not yet been invented in fields that have not yet been invented. And so that experience of being at college and what you learn as part of your college education, I think really does equip you for the future and a rapidly changing future at that. It doesn't mean, though, that you have to pursue a degree like computer science in order to have a good career. And now we see computer science employment sort of sagging a little bit as AI comes on. But it means that you have to be equipped to be nimble, to have skills, and have an education and an approach that you can sell and adapt as the job market changes. But I'd like to think about that value piece because to me, value has got two components, right? It has the what you gain innately from the experience, but it also has what does it cost? Right? So you might sit down at the menu in a restaurant and choose, well, I'd really like to have that, but I'm not going to pay that, so I'm going to order this. And so I think there's a bit of that as you think about college. And I'm so proud of the UC system for how affordable a UC education is. So 90% of our students at UC Santa Cruz come from California. And so about 56% of those students either have a Cal grant or a middle class scholarship. And as a result, they don't pay any tuition. And that's very affordable. We have financial aid. 70% of our students get financial aid. And as a result, more than half of our undergraduates who got their degrees last year graduated with zero debt. And those who had debt, the amount of that debt on average was less than $19,000. I would like it to be better. And we're working to try and raise money and have more scholarships and more paid internships because I think that's very important for experiences as well as for affordability. But we do pretty well as a UC system. And I think the value of a UC degree, the value of a UC Santa Cruz degree is something we should be proud of. And I think the application numbers also suggest that students in California also find value in a UC degree.
I think that's absolutely right. And thank you for the news about the new Gallup poll. I haven't seen that, but I'll take a look at it. I think you've covered some of this in your in a number of your prior responses, but it has just come in, and I'm going to ask it because it will give you a chance to to do an elevator speech. But so UC has 9 tremendous campuses that offer undergraduate education. What is it? What is the unique value proposition of UC Santa Cruz? If you had to compete, not just with UC but with other universities around the country, why should somebody come to Santa Cruz?
Yeah, we have in our strategic plan focus on experiential learning for everybody. And that is really a unique opportunity. And those experiential learning opportunities, I've already referred to them. They might be, doing research in somebody's laboratory, might be doing UCDC or UC Sacramento or study abroad. But on our campus, it tends to be faculty mentored research or scholarship, whether that's in creative writing or in the arts or in the field, and that chance to partner with faculty is, I think, really unique at a research university. And I think we do it better than anybody I know. And so many of our students go on to do great things as a result of those faculty mentored experiences that they have while we're here. One of the ways we're trying to scale that is we have a new series of labs in the sciences called Cures Labs. This is a model that was started at Stanford, and it's basically students in a class who do a research project as a class. And then you get the skills and the experience in doing that, and then you can go off and do something in a faculty member's lab. So there are opportunities like that. working at Lick Observatory, which is our observatory above Silicon Valley on Mount Hamilton, or in the ocean. Whole bunches of students participate in ocean-based and marine mammal-based research here.
So yeah, we've talked a lot about the student experience and about the importance of faculty. I want to shift to staff for a moment. We have
Mhm. Thank you.
um, a huge number of incredible non-faculty staff throughout
Mhm.
UC. And um, uh, this questioner who has written in says that uh, he hears great things about your work with the staff advisory board at Santa Cruz. And so I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the role that staff play at the university.
Well, they are the foundation of the university. We couldn't have a university without our staff. And we have great staff here at UC Santa Cruz. We do work really closely with our staff advisory board. I was with many of them last night at the Second Harvest Food Bank celebration, in which we won the Berry Best Award for fundraising, and led by our staff advisory board for our food bank. They do a number of things that are really helpful. They host me for town halls twice a year. They organize a big picnic that we have for all of our staff in the spring. But the staff are so important and so valuable to us. And I think our staff are just really dedicated, many of them, most of them, to the university and to our mission. We are a mission-driven, a values-driven university, and you see that in our staff as well.
Um, Best part of your job.
Hmm. Walking in the redwoods.
That doesn't sound like
And
work to me.
no, okay. Best part of my job, trying to make things happen for the future of the campus. Building housing, starting programs, hiring staff, faculty, and bringing in new students. That's the best part.
So despite some of the maybe now dated polling data and the fiscal challenges in the state and the challenges that are coming out of Washington, you still like this job, embrace the work, and I can sense that you're optimistic about the future.
Yeah, I'm a natural optimist, so I'm optimistic about the future. I think there are challenges galore, but when have challenges not been part of our lives, right? The University's California has faced many, many challenges, and we've always managed to find our way through. And I think if you stay focused on your values and stay focused on opportunities and don't miss them, despite the challenges, you can find a pathway. It's just not always easy.
I had a board member once who told me that if we didn't have challenges, we wouldn't need people like you and me at the university. So I hate to
Well,
say we hope for them, but Chancellor, thank you so much for joining us today and the 400 plus people that have been on. I've gotten, in addition to the questions, a number of very positive comments about your leadership at the campus and what people have learned during the course of this conversation. So I think it's
well,
always terrific when people not only get to hear more about how their leaders think about the institution and the work that's there, but they get to get a little glimpse of the personal side, which does not come out all the time. So, um, to my favorite chancellor from Deadwood, South Dakota, Chancellor Larive, thank you so much for what you do for UC Santa Cruz, UC, the state of California, and higher education. Appreciate the chance to visit with you today.
thanks you, and thanks to everybody who watched. I appreciate you all. Bye.
Bye, everybody.